In this movie, we're going to continue looking at dates and times. In the last movie, we saw how to build a Unix timestamp, and in this movie, I want us to take a look at how we can format that Unix timestamp. And there are two functions that are going to allow us to do that. The first function is date, and the second is strf time. Now you can either pronounce that string for time, string format time, but the idea is that we're taking a timestamp and turning it into a string. So in both cases, we're going to be formatting a Unix timestamp into something that's human readable, like November 13th, 2005, instead of however many seconds it's been since 1970. That's not very user-friendly. And you'll see that each of these functions takes a timestamp as a second argument, and that timestamp is just a simple Unix timestamp. We can take any timestamp we've created and drop it into that second argument. It's the format that's the tricky part and that we're going to have to learn more about. In fact, the functions may look identical, but what differentiates them is the format, and each function has its own format rules. Let's take a look at date first. The easiest way to show you the formatting options for date is to take a look at the php.net page for date. Go to php.net and do a search for date, and you'll get this page. And here are the different formats for the output string. Let's scroll down. Notice the format characters over here, D, capital D, lowercase j, and so on. And then it tells you what each code does. So for example, D is the day of the month, 2 digits with leading zeros, such as 01 to 31. And you'll notice that J is also the day of the month, but without leading zeros, 1 to 31. Capital D is a textual representation of a day, the 3 letters, Monday through Sunday, so WED for Wednesday, for example. Now we can scroll down a bit further on the page to see how these strings are used. The format is a simple string, but with the format characters as placeholders for each part of the date. When the date function is called, it will replace the format code placeholders with the actual data. So for example, this format string here will return the line right above it. Monday, the 8th of August, 2005, and then the time. Now in this example, they aren't passing in a timestamp, so it defaults to the current time. But in the example below that, you can see that they do pass in the timestamp as the second argument. They build the timestamp using maketime and then pass it in. Notice also that the format code that they're using in that second one is just simply an L, and that's it. And if we go and look at L, you'll see what it does is it returns the day of the week. So this will tell you what day of the week July 1st, 2000 is. Now that's a nice little trick. Not only are we able to format the data into something human readable, but we're actually able to find out some information about the calendar as well. Now personally, I don't use date, and I would recommend that you also use string for time instead. The reason why I like it better is that it's part of the Unix open standard, and it's used by many programming languages besides PHP, and it has support for formatting dates in foreign languages as well. So let's take a look at the string for time format codes to see how they're different from the ones for date. So for example, if we look here at D, you'll see that there's a percent in front of it first of all. The percent helps make it clear that this is a format code. So all the string for time ones are going to be preceded by a percent sign before the code. So essentially, %D does the same thing that D did in the date function. But now take a look at %D with a capital D. You'll see that this is different. Instead of being the 3-letter code for the day of the week, it's going to be a shortcut for the month, day, and year as numbers with slashes in between them. And instead, if we look at A up here, you'll see that that is the abbreviated weekday name. So that's how we get that same functionality we had before. So some of them are going to be the same. M, for example, down here, the month as a decimal number, that's the same. But capital M and other ones like that are not. So there's a lot of differences. So you really have to learn each set of codes separately. And that's why I think you ought to pick one and stick with it. And I recommend you go with string for time. Now, obviously, this list here of codes on the string for time is a comprehensive list, and you may want to copy down the ones that you're going to use most often and make yourself a little cheat sheet. But you'll also get familiar pretty quickly with them, and you'll be able to remember the ones when you need it. So let's try this out now. I've still got my old window open for datetime Unix. Let's go ahead and do file save as on that, and we'll call this one instead datetime format.php. And I'll just change it up here to say formatting. And then we'll go ahead and clear out all the PHP we had there so we can start fresh. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just build a real simple timestamp with the current time. And we know how to do that with just time. And then let's make ourselves echo back the results of string for time. And we'll say the date today is, and let's put in our format codes. So %M. So the percent sign lets it know it's a code for string for time. And then the M tells it that it'll be the numbers for the month. And then we'll have %D and %y. And then last of all, we need to pass in, of course, our timestamp. Let's go back over to our browser and try that out. Instead of loading up Unix, I'll load up format.php. There we are. So today is November 1st, 2008. Now today is not actually November 1st for me. Instead, I set my system clock to that time so that I could show you something. Now earlier I pointed out the reasons why I like string for time better than date. But there's one feature that date has that string for time doesn't. Date has options for leaving off the leading zeros before a month or a day number. Now notice here I've got the 01. That's the leading zero that I'm talking about in front of it. We have the option to leave that off in date, and it could just simply be 11/1/08. And the same thing would be true if we were talking about January. String for time would print it as 01, whereas in date we have the option of leaving the leading zero off. And a lot of times we're going to want to get rid of those leading zeros. So I'm going to show you how you can do that by writing yourself a helper function. It's a little bit of a hack, but it is effective. So what we'll do here is we'll just take this line and we'll copy it down here. And instead of just sending in the formatting, we're going to put an asterisk in front of each of these two. Those are the two places where a zero may show up. So we're sort of marking the position where we want to watch for a zero. And we're doing that with this asterisk. Now, you can use any character you want. I picked the asterisk because it's something that I don't use very often when I'm formatting this kind of date. But you could easily use a different character if you needed the asterisk for another reason. So now let's write ourselves a helper function. Function strip zeros from date, and then we'll pass in marked string equals, and there we go. We'll pass in an empty string by default. And the first step is that we're going to remove the marked zeros. So no zeros will be equal to string replace, and we'll use string replace to look for every occurrence of an asterisk with a zero, and if we find it, eliminate both. Get them both out of there. And then we'll just need to pass in the marked string so it knows what to search through. And then once we do that, the last step is we'll remove any remaining marks, right? Because we don't want to have to deal with the case where we have something like December, which would not have a leading zero, and so we'd still have that asterisk sitting there because it didn't get removed. So we'll then do another step, cleaned string equals, and we'll do another string replace. But this time, we're going to be looking for any asterisk that's still left around, and we'll replace that with nothing, and we'll do that to our no zeros string. And finally, return back that cleaned value. So there we go. Now we have a function that should work for us. Let's just move this string for time down below the function so that it's defined. And we'll just put it around the whole thing. There we go. And I'll save it. And let's come back over. Let's try it out. And there we are. I didn't put a BR tag in there, but you can see this one does have the 01. This one did remove the 01. So most of my PHP projects, I go ahead and just port in a function like this that will help me to use string for time and to be able to get rid of those zeros. And I think it might be helpful to you too. The very last thing I want to show you here is that I can also format strings suitable for storage in MySQL. A lot of people wonder how you do this conversion. You don't want to just pass in a Unix timestamp to MySQL. You want to format it to something that MySQL can understand. Luckily, it's very, very easy to do. Let's do echo HR just to make a nice break there. And then we'll do a new dt equals time. That'll be dt for date time. And then what we want to get is MySQL date time. And the way we're going to do that is do it using that string for time function. And we're going to put in the following formatting code. %Y, that's the year with all 4 digits. And then %M, %D, then a space, %H for the hour, %M for the minute, and %S for the second. There we go. And then, of course, we'll want to pass in that time we were just working with. So we could pass in any timestamp, and we're going to have it output with this formatting. That'll go into this MySQL datetime. And of course, if we want to see the results of that, then we'll just need to do an echo on it. There we go. So we'll come back, and there we are. That's the format that MySQL understands. So go ahead and write down those formatting codes. Make sure that you keep them handy for working with MySQL. But you also may want to just make a copy of this here just to show you what the result should be in case you end up using date or some other system, whatever. This is the format that MySQL wants for date time fields. Now, if it's just a date field, it'll just be the date part of that. but this is the format it's going to use. So now that we've learned to work with and format the dates and times, we're ready to move on. And in the next movie, we're going to look at server and request variables.